They told her that he was fine, and then when she got to the hospital, he was already in a coma. So something that's really hard is that with the level of education that Suji had, she wasn't able to do a whole lot because she wasn't able to teach at the school, and she couldn't work in the kilns because she had 3 children to care for. So she started teaching what they call Sandhya Gurukulam, which means evening knowledge, and it's tutoring classes to the children in the village. And the local ashram paid her to do that, which is a Hindu religious center, hired her to do that. And then when her 2 youngest sons enrolled at Vidya, Vanam, they found out that she had been teaching Sandhya Gurukulam, and they hired her on as the project director. And so Vidya Vanam has a program where a lot of women work there on craft type things. So they make pillowcases and placemats, and they harvest honey, and they just do a bunch of different craft work. So Suji did that originally, and then Pati, the director of the school, asked her to move into the Montessori, where she is now teaching. So she is now also involved in a class called IGNU, which is an open schooling course at Vidya Vanam, and it's empowering local women to speak English better than they do now, and she is about to graduate from that. She hardly spoke English when I got there, and we could carry on a conversation by the time I left. So given the circumstance, she is doing really well. And she says the main thing that her village needs at this point is water, because a wealthy person moved into the village and built their borehole right next to the pipe that leads into the village, so now the whole village doesn't have drinking water. So they're allowed to hike out to his farm and fill their water from his borehole, but that's about 2 kilometers away, and she has to do that walk 8 times a day. So water is the main thing that both her and Cedar Moms have been doing. Okay, so the next woman I interviewed is Vanita, and Vanita is the parent of another 3 of my students, which is how I know her, and her daughter's coming of age ceremony is the one that I got to attend while I was in India, and I will talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Vanita's story is really unique because she is actually not Irula by birth. She is part of the Malayali Gounder tribe, which is just located across the border in Kerala. And when she decided to marry into the Irula tribe, her family completely cut her off and stopped talking to her. And so even now, 18 years later, her father still doesn't talk to her, and her mother has to come and visit her in secret because her father would not approve of it. So Vanita is now living in the Irula tribe, and they have fully accepted her as one of their own children. So she got married when she was 16, had her first child when she was 18, her second when she was 23, and her third when she was 25. And we talked a lot about sort of how the relationship with her family at home changed because they completely cut her out of her life, or out of their lives, which is not something that happens super frequently in India. And so I asked her if she ever regretted making that sacrifice, and she told me that for a while in the beginning she did, because 2 months into her marriage, her husband started drinking a lot, and with his drinking came a lot of domestic violence. So she told me, "My husband, soon after my marriage, for 2-3 months, did not drink. Then he started consuming alcohol and picking up quarrels with others, so it was difficult then." She also expanded on her husband's drinking and told us about a couple instances where there were domestic violence problems in the house, but both her mother-in-law and father-in-law defended her, which again is not something that you would normally see in India. Usually the mother-in-law would side with her son or would encourage her son to reprimand his wife if she wasn't behaving appropriately. So the fact that they have taken her in as one of their own children is really unique, and I think really helps the situation that she is in. Luckily for her, her situation has also changed significantly. About 9 years ago, her husband, this sounds terrible, but hear me out for a second, her husband was bitten by a dog, and in India there's a belief that if you get bitten by a dog, you have to stop consuming meat, alcohol, and tamarind. And he was like terrified that he was going to die, so he just stopped drinking, and ever since then he has not been violent. So, and when that happened in the interview, my translator turned to me and she said, "We should go find that dog." I was like, "Oh, I don't know that we should encourage that," but so she is really happy now. And she also talked a lot about how her mother-in-law was the one that made her life really survivable there because she took her in and continued to raise her. Vanita is also one of the clearest examples that I had, besides Suji, of a mother who has made significant sacrifices for her children. I asked her if she enjoyed working in the brick kiln, and predictably her answer was not really, because it's not a very fun job. But she told me that she didn't want to go and work in the city, even if she was qualified, because it would mean leaving her children during the day, and that was something that she had missed out on as a child, because when she went to school, she lived in the hostel, which is just the government housing for students that have to commute too far because of the rural villages that they live in. And so she said she never knew the experience of having a mother's love, and so that's why she wanted to be at home. So she's willing to work in the kilns and do that type of labor so that her children have a better education and have the support of their families. She's also one of the only people who at the end really wanted a copy of the book, and even though she doesn't read English, she said that this book would teach her how to read. So that was hers. And this is the seer that I mentioned briefly. The seer is a ritual that happens when a girl attains age, which basically means when a girl gets her first period. And it's a really intricate process. So for the first 7 days, the girl is living in a thatched room outside of the house alone, which to me sounded terrible and kind of scary because they're alone in this thatched room where there are elephants wandering around. But they all said that it wasn't. And so when one of my students came of age, I went to her thatched room that she was living in, and she was totally happy and was working on social studies homework, which made me happy because that's what I taught. And so she was totally fine, and she was really proud of the fact that she had become an adult and that she was now a woman, and it was something that the whole village was celebrating, which isn't how I had interpreted it through the interviews. The second part of that process is the seer, which is where everyone in the village gathers to worship the concept of fertility, and they all bring her jewelry, food, candy, and then they adorn her in all of that. And everyone in the village offers their blessing to both her and then the goddess Durga Devi, which is the goddess of fertility. So that was really interesting to see because when they described these processes in the interviews, it sounded really oppressive and really isolating to women that were on their period. But really it's a village celebrating the concept of femininity and fertility, and that was really, really cool to see. And that is the kitchen of their house while they cook in that back area. And the final woman that I interviewed is Davy, and her story is really unique because her family has a lot more privilege than most people living in this area. Her father is a banker in the city, so that has opened up a lot of opportunities for her and her sisters. She lives in a village called Takelor, which is where my school actually owns a farm, so I would pass through her village a lot on the way to the farm. And she grew up in Takelor, she was born there, and she now lives there with her husband. When I asked her about her marriage, she told me that it was both love and arranged, which to me made no sense. And so she clarified that a love marriage means that the couple elopes and has no support from the family, whereas an arranged marriage means that the parents choose the person that you marry. So she chose the person that she married but had her parents' permission. So she calls it love and arranged. And again, when I asked her how they met, she told me that he smiled at her on a bus. So transportation and smiling seem to be the main way that people find their significant others. But so she met him on a bus, and her parents for about a year told her that they were looking for a better offer, which in India means a man that has more education, more family assets, and more money, basically. For a woman, a better offer is a woman that's pretty soft-spoken and obedient, but the men's qualifications are more about education. So she had a pretty traditional engagement process, which is where the man and the woman, the clan that they're in within the Irula, there are 7 different lineages, and then each of those lineages has a guru. So you have to go and consult the guru, and then the 2 gurus have to talk to one another and all of the village elders, and then they agree whether or not the marriage is going to go through. After that, the boy has to visit the girl's house twice, and she has to visit his house 3 times, and then they can move forward with the engagement. Her father, though, decided to throw her a really fancy engagement party, which is basically like the seer that I described, but they also exchanged rings. And normally in India they don't exchange wedding rings, but a lot of her father's co-workers were Brahmin, and so he wanted to throw a party that was impressive to people from the city. So they had the first engagement party that ever took place in Takelor, which she seems pretty proud of. They also got married at the local ashram by a Brahmin priest, and that again is a really unique situation because usually Adivasi or the tribal people are not married by Brahmin priests because there is such a division in caste. But they had a Brahmin priest do the wedding, and then one of the most famous gurus in India was also there. So she really liked showing her wedding albums. They have 3 albums of all these posed pictures of everyone at the wedding, and I've seen them 3 or 4 times. So this is her village in Takelor. Takelor is interesting too because half of the village is tribal and half of the village is scheduled caste, which is just the next caste above tribal, but it's not a fully tribal village like the rest of them are. Davy also had a really unique educational process. So she finished 10th grade, which is as high as most schools go in India, and then she did her +2, which would be the equivalent of 11th and 12th grade. And then she started going to a nursing school, but they put her in the delivery ward, and she said she did not like seeing babies that had blood on them, so she quit doing that because it really bothered her. So she decided to pursue college studies of biology and zoology, but then got appendicitis partway through the first term, and so she missed about 15 or 20 days of school. And her family couldn't afford the surgery that she needed, and so they gave her herbal remedies, and her appendix has never bothered her since then. She is skeptical of whether it was actually appendicitis because she told me that she doesn't believe in the herbal remedies. So I don't think she thinks that they worked. But she then heard about the school that was being started in Anakati, and she interviewed with the director on the first day of interviews and then got a job at Vidya Vanam. So she's also a teacher there. She teaches math and is like one of the kids' favorite teachers. She also had her first son about a year ago. So now just kind of some of the concluding thoughts that I learned while I was doing this process. The first one, and I kind of already mentioned this, is with the concept of oppression, and that the way that we see oppression here and the way that women see it there is very different. And a lot of things that I would point to and see as oppressive, women in India would just see as normal. So I started to really question whether or not it was valuable for me to project my Western notions of oppression onto other people, because if I wasn't going to be able to solve those problems, it didn't really seem fair to call attention to the fact that oppression existed. So that was something I thought a lot about. And on a similar note, with the seer and the process of the girl getting her first period, it really caused me to question the way that we view cultural practices in other countries, because a lot of times these oppressive practices that we see are actually really positive and really celebratory processes. And then another thing that I viewed as one of the most important takeaway messages was that education really is the best way to cause development in a place that doesn't have access to education. So a lot of the children in Anakati are still first generation of literacy, be it in Tamil or Malayali or English. But they have already made such big differences in their families and have encouraged their parents to go back to school and have just had a huge impact on people. So to kind of show that, I have 2 videos of my students. Maybe.
Why do you like Vidya Vanam School?
I like
Why?
because there is many subjects. Many use subjects.
What's your favorite subject?
So clearly they're super excited about going to school, which is really rewarding because they, in monsoon season, are walking to school in like crazy torrential downpours, and when they pull into the school every morning in the school bus, they start cheering, and it's just an excitement about education that you really don't see in areas where people take that for granted. And then here's another, oh, it's on the previous slide. Here's another one.
Why do you like Vidya Vanam?
That I like that is this and that so nice, and it's I will learn English, and like all teachers I will like.
What's your favorite thing about Vidya Vanam?
Think and party and then all of I like.
The thing he said at the end was his favorite thing was Sarah Ka, Pati, and Nandini Ka, which are 3 of the teachers there. Well, I'm not teaching there anymore, but I was teaching there. And so just to kind of wrap this up so you guys can ask questions, this was just a quote that I read while I was doing this research that I thought was really impactful by Rumi. And it's listen with ears of tolerance, see through the eyes of compassion, and speak with the language of love. And that to me served as a reminder that my opinion is not always right, as much as I would like to think it is.